Now, if I said to you guys that back in the 1800s, Blackburn had the unwanted label as being the most beery capital in the entire nation of England, chances are you won't believe me. But that is exactly what it was. And today we're going to cover the tale of a lady that fondly became known as the Drunkard's Friend. Now, that lady's name was Elizabeth Ann Lewis. Born on the 10th of March 1848, Elizabeth was the daughter of both John and Anne Lewis, and she was one of 5 siblings. One of her brothers was none other than the famous footballer and former founder of Blackburn Rovers Football Club, Mr. John Lewis. And we covered John Lewis's story kind of in a most recent video of Blackburn Old Cemetery, and I'll put links down below for that. Now, she would marry a chap called Thomas in her later life, and she relocated here to Blackburn. And it was when she got here she was shocked by the amount of public houses and inns, and I think there was over 600 plus such establishments, and I think 225 of them were indeed public houses. Now, obviously, with so many bars, inns, pubs if you will, you had a lot of drunkenness, and this shocked Elizabeth and her husband to the core, to the point where she wanted to do something. Now, she came from a poor family, so helping people was kind of in her nature, because her father George, he was a fighter for the poor and the oppressed, and he would go out many a time helping those in need. So like I said, helping others was in Elizabeth's nature. Now, Anne's parents themselves were teetotalers, and like I said at the start, they were a very poor family, but they're a family of farmers. And Elizabeth herself, you could say she was pretty much well versed in teetotalism from a young age. And I think it was in 1867 when she would marry Thomas Lewis, who himself was teetotal. And together, like I said, when they came to Blackburn, they would try and help those in need. And she tried in vain to set up a movement, the Temperance Movement if you will, which would basically bring people in from the public houses who were spending all the hard-earned wages from the mills and the factories, and she would bring them into her own establishment. Like I said, a temperance movement where instead of drinking alcohol, they would be drinking herbal drinks, sarsaparilla, dandelion and burdock, things like that. But it would also be a place of refuge for these people, where music would be played. You had pianists, you had bands playing. Now, obviously this didn't go down too well with the actual landlords themselves, and at times there would be some bickering, let's say, between the two factions. But this wouldn't deter Elizabeth and husband Thomas, and they would keep on trying to bring those, like I said, that were suffering from the ill effects of alcohol into their flock, if you will. On the 1st of September 1883, Elizabeth would hire a room, and I think it was at Cowell or Cordell Street in Blackburn. But unfortunately, after a week or so of going out and trying to get people interested in her new scheme, only 6 people would attend, 4 of which would sign a pledge. And I think the pledge, and like I said, don't quote me on this, but I think the pledge basically was so people could sign up and they would basically pay a small fee, and that would allow them into this club, if you will, if you want to call it a club. And inside there'll be drinks, like I said, such as sarsaparilla, dandelion and burdock, herbal drinks, probably lemonade and soft drinks, but there was no alcohol at all. Music would be playing, pianists would be there, bands would be playing. And like I said, it was a place of refuge for people who once used to spend all the money on drink. But only 4 people signed up. Now, one of those to sign up, the very first person to sign up, was a man called Mr. John Oates. But it was a bit of a letdown for Elizabeth by all accounts. She was a bit disappointed because she'd been out trying to encourage people into this ideology of obviously turning their backs on vice and turning their backs on drink. But unbeknownst to Elizabeth, one could say, it would only be a matter of time before she would get the interest of many folk around Blackburn, and before long subscription lists were going through the roof. And I think it was around about, like I said, about 1884 when the first public figures were released, and she had something like 80 subscribers. So you could argue, like, in space of what, like I said, about 12 months, 18 months maybe. But from 4 people signing up to this pledge to over 80, it was an incredible turnaround. Now, what seemingly perked the interest of Elizabeth and her husband, Thomas, was the fact that there was another temperance organisation called the Blue Ribbon. And she visited them in 1882, and this kind of perked her interest and spurred her on to achieve great things herself by forming her own temperance movement. Now, she needed somebody to help. She couldn't do it all on her own, so she needed somebody to help go out there to help promote her new membership pledge, if you will. And obviously this wouldn't be easy because she had to pay for somebody to do this. People weren't going to do it on their own back. So she had to actually pay somebody to go out of their way using her own money. Now, it was a man called Richard Kilshaw who would actually become that man who would help promote her pledges. And he started work, I think it was on the 1st of September, again, 1883. Now, a lot of these dates I should remember and I should know because my birthday is also 1st of September. So it's quite apt that this story and a lot of the things that occur all take place that same date, the 1st of September. But yeah, Richard Kilshaw was the first, or well, yeah, you could say he was the first employee of Elizabeth and Lewis. But together they formed a formidable partnership. And like I said, throughout the next 10 years or so, subscription lists will go through the roof, to the point where she was helping many, many people. Now, in 1890, trouble came hurtling towards Elizabeth's door. But it took place in 1889. This is when it all started, but in 1890, it all came to head. But in 1889, the latter end of the year, Elizabeth and her husband Thomas, as well as a few friends, visited Blackpool for half a day. But whilst there, they were seen by a man called John Shaw. Now, John Shaw was a landlord. He was a licensee himself, and he was one of many people in the Blackburn area that weren't taking too kindly to what Elizabeth was doing by setting up these temperance bars and these pledges and these schemes, because basically one could say that people were being taken away from the pubs. So obviously it's money, isn't it? It's profits. But John Shaw would later go public and slander Elizabeth by saying that while she was there over in Blackpool, she was up to no good. Now, I've read 2 articles on this. One of them seems to indicate that she was actually being adulterous with a younger employee of hers, but I can't find any other records apart from one about that. But the other stories all seem to revolve around the fact that she was actually in fact drinking herself whilst in Blackpool, which kind of does make more sense to the slander charges. Now, back in the 1800s, obviously cases such as slander, it was very difficult to prove. Only men seemed to get away with taking people to court and winning that battle, if you will. Women, it was unheard of. But Elizabeth, because she's built up such a following and her temperance bars and pledges were taken off massively, she had a reputation to uphold. So she took John Shaw to court in April 1890. She won that battle. She had many witnesses that came forward on her behalf who dismissed all the charges that John Shaw had thrown at her. Now, John Shaw himself backed down and he apologised to Elizabeth, and I think it may be an out of court settlement. I'll have to double check that, but he definitely admitted to making up these lies and these charges against her. Now, the court obviously found him guilty of perjury, you could say, and again, I put it down below, but he was actually fined, obviously for court costs and obviously damage done to Elizabeth's reputation. But not only did she win that battle, but she also won the battle for women in the future. This opened up doorways for other females, other women, to go to court and prosecute those that were making slanderous charges against them, because up until that point, like I said, it was only men that used to go to court with things like this, not women. So you could also say she reformed how the law looked upon slander cases, and not just favoured the men but also favoured women. So I've just been reading my notes, and in fact John Shaw was fined 40 shillings for damages. So like I said, it was quite a substantial amount, and I'll put the figure down below in today's value. But yeah, she had a reputation to hold, did Elizabeth, and she weren't going to take this lightly. So yes, she had every right to go to court, because the one thing that she didn't want was all her hard work being undone by this one chap, John Shaw. In January 1884, Elizabeth had no option but to find premises which could hold many more people, because subscription rates, like I said, were starting to greatly improve. So she moved to some premises on St. Peter Street, and this was known as the Spinners Institute, and she was there until 1891. And like I said, she outgrew this, so she ended up moving to what is known as Lees Hall, which is, again, it's close to St. Peter Street, and along Mincing Lane, I think it's called, in Blackburn. And this is where her husband worked. He had a workshop there, and he developed and he changed the upper ground floor, which could hold up to 700 people. Now, I think the hall itself was officially opened around about June 1891 by Dr. F.R. Lees, and like I said, this is what the building is now named, the Lees Hall. Such was Elizabeth and her reputation here in Blackburn and throughout England. In 1913, when the King and Queen visited Blackburn, she was offered the opportunity to meet with the royalty, and obviously this drew a bit of criticism from some quarters, such as licensee holders, landlords if you will. But you know, nevertheless, it was a great honour to meet, a great privilege to meet, like I said, royalty, and especially back in the day. Now we know that on 2 occasions Elizabeth would be rewarded for all the hard work that she put in, and she was publicly acknowledged, I think in around 1896, for her hard work by being presented with a cheque for around £140 by the late Reverend Charles, I think it was Garrett. Now he made this presentation on behalf of over 1,000 subscribers, and 10 years later she was also the recipient of a handsome gold brooch and pendant which was studded with precious stones, and she was also given another cheque, this time for £150. Now the fascinating insight into what Elizabeth achieved was in a letter that she wrote, I think it was to the Blackburn Standard, which was printed on Saturday 7th of January 1888. And I'll read a short extract of that article. But basically she wrote in and said, "One man said since he signed the pledge 10 months ago, that he had spent £20 with a tailor, £5 with a jeweller, £10 with a furniture dealer, and several pounds more in other articles. Now, when he was drinking, although he earned a lot of money, he had a miserable and poverty-stricken home. His children were unhappy. They weren't living in comfortable accommodation, and basically all this money was going on drink and, like I said, on vice. Now, she wrote this letter to the Blackburn Standard to show that people were actually changing their lives, and it didn't matter how wealthy or how poor these people were, they all had that one thing in common, and it was drink. But yet people of all ages, and like I said, not just the elderly, not just the wealthy, but also the poor, also the young people who were spending their wages, hard-earned wages that they were earning in the mills and factories, they were writing into Elizabeth, they were visiting Elizabeth and thanking her for changing their lives. So she made an important impact, like I said, throughout the town of Blackburn. It was around 6:30 in the morning on Monday, March 24th, 1924, when Elizabeth herself would sadly pass away. Now, she'd been fighting ill health for quite some time, but it was still a shock nevertheless. Now, we've managed to locate her final resting place here at Blackburn Old Cemetery, and we wanted to bring you guys to the grave and retell her story, because she is one of the most well-known and important characters of Blackburn from times gone by, and we just didn't want her name to be forgotten, because like I said, even though she is well known and her tales are synonymous with Blackburn's history, I don't think many people cover her story as much as what obviously they should do. So we've come out today, we've told the story of the Drunkard's Friend, and here, my friends, is where Elizabeth now lies. Now, I suppose the term the drunkard's friend to some might seem a little bit insensitive. It might give the impression that she indeed herself was a drunkard, but that couldn't be any further away from the truth. She was the drunkard's friend, and it was a term of endearment, and it was a term used fondly to remember the life of Elizabeth Ann Lewis. The drunkard people, the drunks of Blackburn, coined that phrase out of complete respect for this lady. She was magnificent. She did a lot of good for, like I said, the townspeople here in Blackburn. The Temperance Movement, like I said, it grew from strength to strength over the years. 40 years that she spent trying to serve the people of Blackburn. Some of the time it didn't go to plan, some of the time it caused a lot of friction with, like I said, landlords, licensee holders. But nevertheless, she kept on battling through. From the very first beginnings back in the the early 1800s, when only 6 people first turned up, I think it was Cowell or Cardell Street, only 4 people signed that pledge, to where she actually ended up, like I said, before her death in 1924. It's remarkable. She even took part in demonstrations with other temperance memberships and clubs throughout Blackburn. And there's one article, and I'll put the year down below, when over 7,000 people joined forces and walked the streets of Blackburn, and they were all It wasn't to cause trouble, it was to get more people on board, and it was like an outing. It was like a festival, a carnival, if you will. But over 7,000 people all turned up, and when they passed the Lees Hall where Elizabeth herself had hired out above her husband's workroom, she herself joined forces with these 7,000 people, and it bulked the number up even more. Now, they wanted to go to, I think, Whitton Park at the time to have the carnival, if you will, to have the fair, to take the demonstrators. But somehow they ended up going, I think, to Ewood Park and the home of Blackburn Rovers Football Club. Whether or not that had links with her brother John Lewis, who, like I said, was a founder member of Blackburn Rovers, I don't know. But somehow they ended up going to Ewood Park, the ground of Blackburn Rovers Football Club. But like I said, it wasn't a troublemaking exercise on their behalf. However, it seems that many drunks would come out of the pubs, out of the bars, out of the inns, and try to cause some trouble with these demonstrators, these protesters, if you will, or these temperance people. And obviously that was dealt with quickly. Nothing erupted into anything major. There wasn't any major scuffles. I don't think from any account that the police had to get involved. But it was a massive event. Like I said, over 7,000 people to start with, and I think it grew to over 10,000 by the time they got to Ewood Park. So in front of us, this is Lees Hall, and where Elizabeth would hold her temperance meetings. And on this old water fountain, erected by members and friends of, I think is it Mr. Lewis or Miss Lewis? Yeah. Teetotal Mission, in memory of Dr. F.R. Lees, what's it say? The great teacher, philosopher and defender of teetotalism. Can't really read that. And adopt the temperance to with us drink pure, bright, matures choices of diet to man. And I think it says September 1897. So yeah, this is, like I said, the Lees Hall, which Elizabeth's husband once hired out as
just say Lees still on it,
a coach making company. And on the glass door, as Vicky just says, Lees Hall, number 3 chambers. So they have kept some names still intact, which is cool. But it is now a piercing company, Hex Piercing, Clothing, Accessories and Collectibles. Now, as we leave Elizabeth's grave behind us and we reflect on what one person born into poverty can achieve with their lives, it's incredible what Elizabeth did ultimately succeed in doing. And she left behind a legacy. She left behind joy in people's hearts and minds, people that she helped, and there must be thousands of people like that. But if you did like this video today, guys, don't forget to please comment down below. Don't forget to give us a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more tales of this kind coming in the future. We're also going out looking at some more unsolved cases. So if you like that kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share the video. The more people that see it, it does help our channel immensely. But from rainy Blackburn Old Cemetery, I want you to take care, look after yourselves, and as always, we will be soon back with another tale from our dark, but at times, glorious past. Take care, everyone.